Hello, everyone. This is Nicole Johnson Starr with the PTSD Retreat radio talk show. I get to introduce to you guys a new series. I've hinted at it. I've told you about it. And this live broadcast tonight is for introducing the first part of this series that we're doing called The Six Senses of PTSD. Now, my guests tonight definitely know about this sense. It's using food in the body for dealing with, I'm going to focus on PTSD, but really when you talk to these guys, you're going to see that there's so much more that can be done for our bodies, and I strongly believe this myself, but let me tell you about them first. Our two guests tonight are Pam Colleen out of London, Ontario, Canada, and Jurian Plesman. I did it again, Jurian. Jurian Plesman with a Y sound. Jurian Plesman. He lives in Australia, but he's originally from Europe. Is it Norway, Jurian?
No, Amsterdam.
Netherlands.
Holland.
Okay, he's from Amsterdam. I've actually been there. I love it there. But he's from Amsterdam, and so we're getting a very international perspective today. I'm actually so excited. I've been wanting to hook these two together for an interview for a long time, and this is finally coming together. So both of you guys, thank you so much for being here tonight. And folks who are listening, this is going to be a 30-minute segment, and then you'll be able to come back later and hear more when we record a little bit more. So this is just going to be the introduction, and then we'll be starting to get into the meat and potatoes of our discussions as these segments go on. So I'm going to have Pam. Hi.
Hi. Thanks for having me on the show. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's purely selfish. I've wanted to talk to you forever, and now I've got you sequestered. You can't go anywhere. So I know you have books out, you do seminars, radio, TV, and all about changing biochemistry. I want you to just tell me a little bit, because I know this is going to take a lot longer than just 30 minutes.
Sure, I'll try and give you the Reader's Digest version of my life and why I do what I do. And that is because essentially, when I was in my early 20s, I collapsed with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, multiple chemical sensitivities. I was actually also diagnosed with ADD. And for me, the shift in my health was sudden, it was dramatic, it was after an infection. I was traveling overseas after university, and in my latter months overseas, I was in London, England, and I was living in a moldy apartment, and at the time I didn't understand how toxic black mold was. And for me, that was the last straw in terms of my health. After 6 months of living in that moldy apartment, I collapsed with this serious infection, and it just seemed never ending. I was just persistently ill for years and years and years, and of course initially started running from doctor to doctor to doctor. They didn't have answers for me. I knew that medications, I wasn't comfortable with taking medications, so I had to go down the road of nutrition because I was getting such little help from the medical establishment. And I will tell you, I did a lot of things wrong when I did the nutritional route. Through a lot of trial and error, I've come to the conclusions I've come to and I work with today. But throughout all of the 90s, for the most part, I made all sorts of mistakes in terms of guessing which supplements to take, in terms of guessing which diet would work for me. Some of the diets that I did, of course, actually backfired and made me sicker, both mentally and physically. My cognition, my memory, my mood, by doing a lot of these very nutrient-deficient diets actually made me worse. The worst diet being a strict vegetarian or vegan diet. That actually backfired completely on me. So I made a lot of mistakes in my journey. And the whole time I was sick, I had severe insomnia. I was lucky some weeks if I could sleep 6 hours a week. And so it was very traumatizing for me. And during that entire spell, I said to myself, come hell or high water, I am going to find out what made me sick and how to get myself well, so that I could help others. So I made a huge commitment to myself and to others to say that I wouldn't let anybody else have to go through this living hell that I went through for basically the latter part of the 80s and 90s in my life. So that's what I do right now. I love what I do. My clients get well. I call myself Sergeant Pam. My program is very strict. believer in education, so I do a lot of educational components to what I do, including a lot of seminars, online seminars. I do a lot of radio shows and so on, because I believe, there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. And what I like to do is try and help people identify that misinformation, because very commonly it's the misinformation that's making us very, very sick today, and that's tragic.
Pam, I am so grateful you brought up about the education, because I forgot to mention something that's really important to our listeners. Folks, what you're going to hear tonight is what is working for many, many people. And it's not mainstream. You're not going to hear this in the news here in the U.S., but it deserves to be. But let me say this, if there is a change that you'd like to make in your life, whether it be for health reasons, for a mental diagnosis, any reason, just to lose weight, please go to your medical or mental health professionals and get their assistance. Go to Pam. Her website is pamclean.com. She's awesome. Go talk to someone and get assistance with making that decision, because there's a lot involved. You don't want to just jump into anything. As you hear, Pam said she made a lot of mistakes before she found things. Please work with your medical staff. This show is for information and educational purposes only. So now that my butt's legally covered, Pam, please continue.
Well, I think what I should do next is introduce our other guest tonight here, Urian Plessman, because it is really a true honor for me to be on this call with Urian. I can't tell you what a thrill it was for me to come across his book, his information online, his website. I'll let him tell you more about that. But what I did as a sort of a labor of love was to write a book about addiction and mood disorders, because I see this as basically, an epidemic that's happening throughout here in North America and through other countries in the world too, and how this epidemic is crippling our healthcare system. And I knew that there was a connection with nutrition, so I knew I had to get this book out because it's a missing piece to the puzzle. And while I started doing research for my book, I came across Urian's work online, and I was so thrilled to see this pioneer in Australia, having blazed a trail now for several decades. And his story is so compelling because I'd say he's probably one of the first psychologists out there who understood the food and mood connection and fought for it back as early as the 1970s. And unfortunately, even though he was onto something big, what happened was he was ostracized from the mainstream community that he was surrounded by, which is really quite tragic. And I think he's able to redeem himself today because more and more people are learning about the food and mood connection. And really, we have Urian to thank for making that connection. So I'm really honored and thrilled to be on this call tonight with Urian.
Now, how long have you two known each other?
Yeah, well, Pam, if you could see me, my head is alight. I'm full of light now. But it's amazing we had the same background because, of course, my problems started in the Second World War when we were occupied by the Germans and we were hiding Jews. And we had, and we were on top of a building, and I had to cross because we couldn't go into the street. It was all. We were not allowed to walk in the street at night. So at night we had to go over the roof of the guttering. And later on, when I got sick, because I've been sick for quite a few years, I had PTSD, what I call now PTSD. In my days, there was no such thing as PTSD. It was called neuroticism. And I went to the psychiatrist and I went to the psychologist and I would put on drugs. The drugs in those days were different from what they are now. I was on very powerful sedatives, for instance, Nembutal, which is a very dangerous drug because the drug between dose and overdose is very small, and I overdosed quite a bit. But the main thing is that, I saw my problems as because I had no name for it. There was anxiety, I had nightmares. Every night I was hanging off a gutter, and of a tall building, and I kept on dreaming that night after night, and I was full of anxiety. And so and I had no educational background because during the war there was no school. So I got my background, my education here in Australia, studying at night while I was working during the day. But anyway, I finished up in the hands of psychiatrists and psychologists, and they put me on drugs. And I got worse and worse and worse. And one day somebody said to me, "Why don't you go and study yourself psychology?" I said, "Oh no, I'm too stupid, you know." And then I thought, well, maybe I should do this. So I started studying. I first of all started with law, then I went over to psychology. And while I completed the psychology course, I could not help myself. In other words, I was sedated all the time. I was on drugs. Nobody knew that I was on drugs, but I considered myself as being a drug addict. Anyway, one of the tutors said to me, "Why don't you go into drug addiction? You know, there's going to be a big problem in this." I said, "Okay, I'll do that." So I started working for a drug referral center as a volunteer, teaching psychotherapy because I did a course in psychotherapy. And so I wrote an article called Positive Ego Training Program, and people thought, "Oh, that was wonderful." But I knew it was not wonderful because it didn't help me. And one day my wife gave me a book by Roger Williams, Nutrition Against Disease, and I saw in a chapter there that all drug addicts were hypoglycemic. I said, "Hey, what's this?" So I went on the hypoglycemic diet. And after many, many years, I suffered from depression and all these dreadful disease for many years. And suddenly I went on the hypoglycemic diet, and suddenly I started to feel better. It took me quite a while to adjust because you can't just go on the hypoglycemia and just out of the blue you feel better. No, that's impossible. Anyway, while I was teaching psychotherapy, I taught the clients instead of the counselors. I was supposed to teach psychotherapy to counselors, volunteer counselors. But instead of the counselors, the clients came in and they started following me. And so I developed this course whereby I taught clinical nutrition plus psychotherapy. And the idea was that people have to use the tools of psychotherapy and nutritional psychotherapy and help themselves. I said, "I'm not a psychotherapist, I'm only a teacher." And this is how I operated. So, and I got quite a success rate out of but all my colleagues would say, "Oh, he's mad, he's gone mad now, he's into nutrition, you know." And yeah, and so...
That's the type of mad I appreciate, by the way.
Yeah. So, all my colleagues who were psychologists were against me, you know, but I kept on going. But I couldn't explain why hypoglycemia would cause mental illness. Unfortunately, I was very fortunate that one of my clients was an alcoholic, and he was a lecturer of biochemistry at the Sydney University. And I said to him, "Look, I have a problem. Why does hypoglycemia cause addiction?" Because I saw that as my problem. Anyway, and the funny thing is that, so he went into this, and every night he came back and said, "I found something, I found this." But in the end, we finished up by understanding when you are hypoglycemic, you have an insulin resistance problem. In other words, your body is not absorbing sugar and metabolize it into biological energy, which is called ATP, or adenosine triphosphate. So, and if your body can't produce ATP, it hasn't got the energy to convert one set of molecules, let us say tryptophan, into another set of molecules called serotonin, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter. And for long last, we had an explanation. The other problem was how could we test this? So I got to a doctor. I was working in a hospital then, and the doctor came to me and said, "Look, can you stop your clients coming to me asking for drugs?" I said, "George," he was George Samra, by the way, "George, I need your help." I said, why do you want my help? He said, well, I want you to test people for hypoglycemia, and I know it can be done over glucose tolerance test, and they do it in America. So he said, okay, have a go at it. And so I presented him one client. He was not an addict, he was actually a kleptomaniac. And he had been 6 times in court. He always stole little things, like pencil, that worthless things. But the 6th time he was going to jail. So I told him, go back on your Coca-Cola. He was drinking Coca-Cola all the time. And I'll get you tested for hypoglycemia. And there, George saw that he was hypoglycemic. And he designed a test for hypoglycemia as distinct for a test of diabetes. So that test is available at our website, Testing for Hypoglycemia by Dr. George Semra at Cobra. So now we had a test. So therefore, if I had a client who had committed an offense, I could go to court and I could present a doctor's certificate that he was hypoglycemic, and so that...
Urian?
Yeah, am I too long?
No, you're too good. You've jumped ahead. We're only supposed to be introducing. We're introducing you guys.
Sorry. Yeah, okay.
You're cheating.
No,
you're...
Stop the recording now.
But I think it was, wasn't it 3 or 4 years ago that I first interviewed you, Urian, for my book, in preparation for my book? I think we've known each other for about 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, that's right. That's about 2 years ago. It's 3 years ago, isn't it?
Something like that. And your first book, I think your book was called Getting Off the Hook, right?
That's right, yeah. Yeah, that is right. And of course, in those days, the psychiatric... So one of the things that happened is that my clients became counselors, and they applied the techniques. And they went to work for the various hospitals, and one of the hospital doctors said, "Oh, what are you doing here? That, hypoglycemia is rubbish. Where do you get this from?" "Oh, urea plasmon." So then the Psychiatric Association in Australia contacted the head of the prisons department, because I was working in prisons, and said, "You have to stop this Mr. Plasmon doing psychiatry, because he's not trained as a psychiatrist." I said, "It's not psychiatry. You people can't do anything. I am a nutritional psychotherapist, which is different things." And so this is what happened, and it's
I think what's so amazing is that you blazed the trail, Urian, and here we are in 2013, and it's slowly starting to get out there. Nowhere near to the degree it needs to be, but I think there's still a lot of resistance, isn't there?
That's an understatement. It's interesting. I've taught with each of you guys, in depth, especially Urian, because I wanted to know what was going on. I told both of you guys I actually have been changing everything that goes into my system, and I get to thank both of you guys. And Pam, I found out about you because of Urian, so I'm so grateful. But I have started changing everything, and it's amazing to see the differences. And I have PTSD, and there's many of my clients that have PTSD. You were saying, Urian?
You can't expect the profession to change, because their livelihood depend on drugs. So long as they can sell drugs, they are in existence. There are studies to show that about 60% of patients in the hands of psychiatrists and psychologists remain depressed, treatment-resistant depression, and 40% only can benefit from the traditional psychiatric treatment. And that is the trouble, but you can't change the profession, because my doctor who's a nutritional doctor, he says himself, I can't practice nutritional medicine, because I make my money out of 10-minute interview, and I get my money that way. If you do nutritional medicine, you have to have 1-hour interviews,
Yeah, didn't you tell me, Urian, how many semesters do doctors receive in med school for nutrition?
Say that again? I didn't hear that.
In med school, I think it was you that told me this, how many semesters of nutrition do doctors receive during their entire med school education?
Well, the person that I'm talking about, the nutritional professor of biochemistry, he taught at the University of Sydney, and he said only one semester. And he said you can't teach nutritional medicine in one semester because you have to cover all the vitamins and minerals and all that, you know, the usual thing. But to go into nutritional medicine, I mean, I've done it for 20 years and I'm still learning. I'm still feeling, I have to learn more and more and more, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't, there is no money in it for it. So the only way to introduce nutritional medicine is by teaching people, the very clients that are sufferers from a post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or mental illness. I call it mood disorders, you know, because it covers the whole lot. But these are the people that will teach the doctors, because my clients taught doctors, you know, and they insist on having a glucose tolerance test for hypoglycemia, which is different from a diabetic test. A diabetic test is only one test, it's the hemoglobin test, whereas a test for hypoglycemia is, we take 4 hours, sometimes 6 hours, but 4 hours, because my clients, they were prisoners, and some of them became very violent while they were having a glucose tolerance test, because it can be very upsetting to have a glucose tolerance test when you are hypoglycemic.
I always tell people that you can't talk somebody out of a mood disorder or addiction. I know what it feels like to have persistent chronic fatigue, brain fog, anxiety, insomnia, and so on. And no matter how much talk therapy I would have gone through in those days, nobody could have talked me out of those conditions, because as long as my biochemistry was a mess, and believe me, it was a terrible mess, there was no way I was going to be able to come out of that situation. It was only until I understood how to restore my biochemistry, how to properly nourish my body and my brain, that's what allowed for me to clear the fog in my brain and elevate my mood, my memory, increase my motivation, my joie de vivre, if you prefer that term. But it's very difficult when the biochemistry is weak. So in other words, what I say is the opposite of what mainstream psychology or psychiatry might say. I'm saying it's the physical that has to be addressed in order to help the mental or the psychological. It's not the other way around, in my opinion. That's not just based on my own experience, it's based on the experiences of several of my students and my clients, because as they build their biochemistry, as they start eating enough animal fat in the diet, after they get rid of their cholesterol phobia, their animal fat phobia, and start eating the traditional diets that they were supposed to be eating, then they always report back to me that they feel more mentally stable, that they feel happier, etc. It takes a lot more work than that. I'm oversimplifying a very complex situation, but in a nutshell, that's something that I like to instill in people.
Well, we are definitely going to get into this more. You were about to say something, Urian.
I want to fully agree with Pam there, because you have to first treat the biological or the biochemical aspect of personality before you treat psychology. Now, I believe also that you need psychology, but after the treatment of the biochemical abnormality.
You know,
that is why the cardinal rule is in mental illness, first treat the biological aspect and then the psychological aspect. Because there's one thing that we mustn't forget. People that have been mentally ill have been on drugs. And when they are on drugs, they damage the receptors of the neurotransmitters in the brain and in the gut, wherever it is. And they have to be repaired. In the olden days, we were taught that the brain can't repair itself, but that is not true. You can repair the brain by a high-protein diet, but it takes, in some cases, 1 year. And there are studies to show by Volko in America that it may take 1 year depending on the severity of the drug taking.
Well,
so,
Urian,
yeah,
you're doing it again. You are getting ahead.
sorry.
Folks, as you can hear, we've got a lot of expertise on this episode, and this was just an introduction tonight. So this segment is just the introduction to our two experts. in about, I'd say 35 minutes, you're going to want to come back and hear some more if you're available, because we're going to take a quick break. We're going to take a 30-minute break so we all can eat, because it's late at night on the East Coast here and lunchtime other places in Australia, etc. So come back in 30 minutes, and this is the first part of the series, The Six Senses of PTSD. And if you'd like to know more, or you'd like to call in or be a part of the show, the telephone number you can call in is 801-580-1976. Again, that is 801-580-1976. Or you can Skype with us. You'll only be able to type it in, but you can send us a Skype message, and the Skype is the PTSD Retreat, as in post-traumatic stress disorder. So the PTSD Retreat, and there's no spaces, and it's all lower cases. And we look forward to talking to you. And you can also send us an email at support@theptsdretreat.org. Again, that's support@theptsdretreat.org. Or you can go to our website at theptsdretreat.org or ptsdretreat.org. So thank you guys so much for listening to this segment. Pam?
Thank you so much, Nicole and Urian. I'll be back with you guys in 30 minutes then.
Yes, definitely. Urian, thank you so much. And just hold off, you guys. Don't go anywhere. To everyone else, this is Nicole Johnson Starr, Pam Colleen, Urian Plesman, and this is the PTSD Retreat Radio Talk Show. Good night.
I'm glued to my chair.